Anti-black racism and racism is as Canadian as maple syrup.
Even in the fugitive slave law, it said that a slave was the property of the owner, just like his animals, his machinery, etc.
We often imagine Canada as the end of the journey, the place where freedom finally began. But before crossing the river to safety, many passed through one last hidden place. In the 1830s, Lewiston stood at the closest point between the United States and Canada. Tryon Folly, a house never lived in, held 4 cellars used for storage. For those escaping slavery, these rooms were silent, dark, and hidden. But they were also the last place of safety before crossing the river. To understand this site and the people who protected it, we began at the Lewiston Museum.
My name is Tom Collister. I'm the curator for the Historical Association of Lewiston Museum here. We're sitting in our what we call our Underground Railroad display. It highlights around the book Freedom Crossing that was written in 1964 by a local woman. And we have on this side we have the houses that are here in Lewiston that are real, and over on this side we have documentation of the Underground Railroad coming through here to prove that it was really came through Lewiston at its time. Significance of the Tryon House was the fact that at the time it was about a half-mile north of the village, and it was all heavy, thick woods. There was nothing along there except a small road that went to Fort Niagara. Most of the people in Lewiston appear to have been abolitionists. They were members of this church here, which was Episcopalian, and they were members of the First Presbyterian Church that was out behind us. Many of them were Masons, and many Masons seemed to be abolitionists themselves. So they would have hid the slaves here. They would have moved the slaves here and helped the slaves get across to Canada. Josiah Tryon was the brother of Amos Tryon. Amos Tryon was a famous businessman here in Lewiston. Was there pushback? Was he a good man? Yes, he was a very good man. In his obituary, it's written on paper about how good of a man he was and how much of a caring man he was. As a matter of fact, he is probably the most well-known figure today in Lewiston by the majority of the people. So they had a working network, I believe, back and forth where they could freely cross and say, hey, strangers are in town. That was the code word, by the way, in Lewiston. Escaping slaves were known as strangers. And they would have had that network set up somehow, and I believe that's how they were able to get a lot of success in getting slaves across. For me, we keep it alive just like the Holocaust of World War II is kept alive. It was a terrible time in our country where we persecuted people, especially people of color, for a long time. Our country was built on the backs of them, and we need to continue to let people know how terrible it was.
Much of what happened here was never written down. Secrecy kept people alive, and it also left gaps in our records. Crossing into Canada brought safety, but not equality. To understand the legacy of these journeys and what they mean today, we spoke with a scholar who studies race, history, and identity in Canada.
So I am Christopher Stewart Taylor. I'm an associate professor in the Department of History. I'm also the associate vice president of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism at the University of Waterloo. From my perspective, freedom was a very interesting concept when they reached Canada. Yes, if we're really looking at what we call the quote-unquote Underground Railroad, which fundamentally, in my own work, in my own research, I call it the myth of the Underground Railroad. Here's why. There is a perception, particularly around, let's just say, K to 12, so kindergarten to high school, that Canada was its promised land. You learn about Harriet Tubman and so on and so forth. So yes, People who came to Canada enslaved people after 1834. However, it wasn't as if racism ended at the border. So you may have been legally free, but you still experienced segregation. Segregated schools for black folks existed in Canada until the in Ontario until the 1960s, in Nova Scotia until the 1980s. So you may have come here in 1845 and said you were quote unquote free. But what does freedom look like if you can't just go to a restaurant that you want to? Is that truly freedom? Is it truly freedom that you don't have the ability to be your whole self? That people can still deny you from renting a place or deny you from going to a restaurant because of your race? Is that freedom? You may not be enslaved, but is that truly being free? So how does the legacy of the Underground Railroad continue to shape black communities today and the legacies today? I think it's twofold, or multiple-fold, I should say. In one way, it has created this false narrative that Canada loves black people. Because if all you're learning in school is the underground, in black history, all you're learning about is the Underground Railroad, then there's going to be an assumption that Canada loved black people. So any racism or anti-black racism that you might face today isn't a big deal because Canada loves black people. Anti-black racism and racism is as Canadian as maple syrup. And if we're only learning about the Underground Railroad and thinking, well, black people escaped enslavement, they escaped racism, come here, then the racism that is real to somebody is just a bad apple. But no, it's a fabric of our communities.
The Tryon Cellars hold more than stone and silence. They hold the memory of people who risked everything, and of a community that rebuilt its life across the border. The legacy of the Underground Railroad is not finished, and continues in the voices, identities, and struggles that shape black life in Canada today. Freedom was a beginning, not an ending.